Awesome, Liz. Thank you so much. And again, welcome everyone to our talk, Establishing a Scalable Web Accessibility Education Ecosystem. Before we begin, we have a few house notes. First and foremost, there are images in this presentation. For more decorative images, we've integrated descriptions into our narration. And for key images, the speaker will comment with an explicit description. The slide deck is available for folks to follow on their own. And lastly, we want to thank our ASL interpreters for their work today. I'm excited for me and my colleagues to share about our experience. In just a year and a half, our web accessibility, or A11y, education ecosystem has gone from small planted seeds to a maturing community garden supported by dozens of GitHub employees, who we call Hubbers. We'll share this journey through the following sections. After some introductions, we'll talk about how we planted seeds, particularly in our bootcamp and champions programs. We'll then talk about how the program started working together in our companion planting. Lastly, we'll talk about how we made a community garden. We'll leave you with some takeaways and pro tips, and of course, we'll have a Q&A at the end. By the end of this presentation, we hope that you'll understand what is GitHub and the role accessibility plays at the company, to recognize the major pillars of GitHub's A11y education program, to assess the pros and cons of an in-house A11y education program for your specific organization, to acknowledge the value of team communication and collaboration, and even to get inspired to start and or mature your own A11y education program with takeaways and pro tips. I'm one of 3 speakers today. My name is Alexis Lucio, for those who are unfamiliar. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a senior accessibility designer here at GitHub and the lead for our accessibility design bootcamp. I'm a non-binary Latina person with short dark hair, facial piercings, and tooth jumps. Today I'm wearing my pink rimmed glasses that help me see a little bit better. And I'm wearing a large graphic cardigan. Behind me are some light blue and white walls.
Hi, I'm Catharine McNally, the Senior Program Manager for Accessibility on Design Operations. I'm a white woman with shoulder length brown hair, wearing a black blouse. I am deaf and I need cochlear implants to hear. One of my roles here at GitHub is to help scale accessibility across design while supporting shift-left efforts for engineering and our product organizations.
And I'm Lindsey Wild. I'm a senior software engineer on the accessibility team, and I helped to create and develop the Champions Program pilot. Before we jump in, what is GitHub? GitHub is a developer platform used to build software. We have over 100 million users. GitHub allows people all over the world to collaborate on software projects. We have over 3,000 Hubbers, or GitHub employees, which is important as we talk about scaling education and some of the things we had to consider. The accessibility team at GitHub is a decentralized team of designers, engineers, product, program, and governance managers. We have the opportunity to work with every feature team at GitHub based on our unique position as a platform team. There are 3 main categories of support that we provide: technical, education, and compliance. In the technical category, we help research, advise, test, and support accessibility best practices in all phases of the product lifecycle. In the education category, we help develop training, guides, tooling, conduct office hours, and one-on-one pairing sessions to advance peer accessibility awareness. And in the compliance category, we help to manage accessibility audits and their schedules, triage audit issues, and enforce that audits are conducted across GitHub's products. That is a very quick overview of our accessibility team at GitHub.
Thanks to our accessibility team, we had the ability to develop 2 new programs in 2023, our Accessibility Design Bootcamp and Accessibility Champions program. The Accessibility Design Bootcamp is facilitated by Alexis with a customized content unique to each team, creating greater relevance and applicability of the content. The training courses were done by the team in small groups in a live setting together, which created engagement and a sense of togetherness during the course together. Our Accessibility Champion program also features training and hands-on activities with the distinct difference that it is asynchronous, meaning it's done at their own pace and time. The content is more generalized to the different roles: a track for design, a track for engineering, and content, and soon to come product. People have the option to complete the entire onboarding in a couple of days, while others choose to spread it out over a few weeks. It's been incredibly rewarding to watch these two programs grow in 2023. In development of these two programs, you've been able to see the fruits of our labor. Our champions in bootcamp, we were overwhelmed by the interest and positive feedback from hubbers who wanted to learn more. They wanted the sessions to be longer. They wanted more homework. The satisfaction ratings of our bootcamp and champion programs through our surveys were really high across several aspects: in the content, in the engagement, in the support, and application of the learnings in their work. With this boost in interest, they also engaged in our Slack channels and office hours, asking questions, supporting each other. They remarked that they felt the spaces were safe to ask questions without judgment. They felt supported in the exploration and learning journeys. We were truly creating nurturing communities that continued to flourish and support those joining in after the onboarding experiences. Alexis will talk about our planting seeds.
Yes, and thank you for that high-level overview, Catherine. So let's look at these programs a little bit more in depth. And let's first start off with the Accessibility Design Bootcamp, which takes us to our first takeaway, and that's to start where you are. The ask for education came my way because I had prior experience creating curriculum and facilitating accessibility workshops. In having these new constraints and allowances, I started where I knew best and felt most comfortable, which was live facilitation. And woo, this was a hurdle to overcome in a company that prioritizes asynchronous communication. And so I want to share the benefits of real-time learning first, because I think a lot of companies, especially those that are fully remote, see this real-time training as a costly investment. And it has its benefits. First, it's easy to adapt. Live content can be easily switched up and iterated to reflect the most relevant interest of a team with less turnaround time compared to editing and producing a video. Second, it has the opportunity for live questions. Attendees have the opportunity to learn with and from peers through discussions and thoughts that arise from lecture material and other questions asked in class. Third, community-centered learning. When you go through the same content at the same time, it can help prompt discussion and cross-collaboration between your peers and the facilitators, building trust. And lastly, we're just being inclusive of learning styles. While self-starters may have no issues in an async environment, others may prefer learning or retaining information better in real time. And so it was these benefits that helped us inform our values for bootcamp. Overall, being relevant and actionable and providing that material to designers, while also being engaging and safe. Despite this explanation, there was still some apprehension about giving up 5 hours of a team's time, which is where our second takeaway comes in. And that's to go where you're wanted. A manager's apathy versus advocacy for a program, especially a pilot program, makes a huge difference for both the organizers and its participants. We were extremely grateful to have our brand and marketing design manager, Asia, understand the importance of accessibility and recognize the impact that the education could have on our team. And with that, a pilot began. We ran our first design bootcamp in March 2023, and the rhythm of this bootcamp kind of looked like this. For a full week, we spent an hour a day with our designers. They watched a LinkedIn learning course as part of their pre-work. And when we got into session, we started with an icebreaker to kind of loosen up our vocal cords and get folks going. Had a small lecture, such as Intro to Assistive Technology, and then went into exercises using Figma, a tool designers were already familiar with. And overall, it went well. Folks found that there was, quote unquote, so much value in the live discussions. And it was awesome to see that the interactivity and humanizing of A11y wasn't lost on our participants. In fact, and probably the biggest compliment for me as a facilitator was that folks wanted more time with us. 33% of participants asked for more homework, interactivity, and time together. On the improvement side, many surveys mentioned that they'd rather spend more time working on exercises than lectures, which got us thinking. If our order of content was largely dictated by the LinkedIn Learning course, what would happen if we used our own pre-recorded videos? And how would the content order change and our daily schedules change? And so we began iterating on a second version of this. While version 1 had 5 consecutive sessions at 1 hour each, version 2 had 4 sessions over 1 or 2 weeks, and hold on for a sec because we'll explain why we have both of these, that were at 90 minutes each, again, honoring that more time together. We shifted from external content for pre-work or a LinkedIn Learning course to our own bespoke internal content for pre-work. We then decided to change from a traditional classroom model, that's the lecture while we're together, to a reverse classroom model, focusing on exercises and the lectures being part of pre-work. And lastly, while our first iteration had one cohort that required a lot of recruitment to get, we were really lucky to have 2 cohorts volunteer. And because they were in such different geographic regions, we decided to have 2 different boot camps to honor those time zones. And that allowed us to have even more subtle variations in order to explore more and see what worked for certain groups. These 2 boot camps were held in August 2023. And some of the key features, again, were custom pre-work. We found that recording a lot of our smaller lectures saved 90 minutes of time that we could use for exercises instead. And we did that by being exercise focused. In addition, we piloted guest lectures from other folks on the accessibility team, be it designers or engineers. And lastly, we took advantage of the week break between one cohort's bootcamp to ask for feedback, like a midpoint evaluation, if you will, which is something we didn't get to do in version 1. It was awesome to get positive feedback of our new direction, and there was a big desire for new content that we didn't have modules for. Recognizing this as an opportunity, I crafted and introduced a new lecture around A11y, inclusive design, and AI, and shared it with both cohorts. Because it's a highly nuanced and complex topic, I found that it did well in a live setting because of the ability to ask questions and to have a safe discussion around it. When feedback time came around, we were elated to see that our work in the pre-recording and making sure that we had more time for exercises was noted and well received. In addition, we saw that there were a lot of feelings of psychological safety and that the ability to ask questions without shame or guilt was super appreciated. A quote reads, "The conversations were the best part indeed. It felt like a really safe place to ask quote unquote stupid questions and get opinions on things like AI generated alt tags. It's very valuable and the different perspectives helped a lot." Again, on the improvement side, 40% of participants said they completed all of the pre-work and the remainder replied most. So that's something we definitely want to improve. And while our first iteration of bootcamp talked about more time together, this round of surveys had a lot more mentions of Zoom fatigue and an ask for more breaks. As for version 3, it's a work in progress as we expand to different functions and think about how to support different learning styles, needs, and time commitments. Having worked on this for almost a year, it's incredible to not only see designers learn, but for bootcamp itself to grow with them. And each time I teach this bootcamp, it's like planting a different variety of seed. Each needs a little adjustment of sunlight, water, nutrients, and time. And with each iteration, I have more confidence in bootcamp and the value it provides to our design org. I'm going to pass it off to Lindsey to talk about the other seed that we had planted.
Thanks, Alexis. So awesome to hear about the design bootcamp. I'm going to be talking to you about the other seed, as Alexis mentioned, which is our Accessibility Champions program. The problem that we identified was that we were seeing an increased volume of accessibility audit issues to triage, provide guidance for, and validate, which created a resourcing strain on the central accessibility team. There was a bottleneck. The solution we had in mind was to enable more hubbers to triage, provide guidance for, and validate those audit issues for their own products, which is creating greater relevancy and connection to the experience. We were also hoping that this would organically spread accessibility knowledge throughout the company. There were 4 main questions we wanted to answer when building out this program. First, what is achievable? We needed to consider scheduling, level of expertise that people may have coming in, and how we'd market the program. People are really busy. How can we best convince them that they should spend their time doing this? Second, how can it scale? How do we onboard 5 people, 50, 100? We needed to set up flexibility in our process to be asynchronous and consider other disciplines outside of engineering, which is the first one that we started with. Third, what are unique responsibilities? What do we want and expect these champions to do after going through the training? We needed to provide specific and actionable tasks and expectations of them. Finally, how can it be measured? What metrics can we capture to show success or failure? And how is this impacting our accessibility program? Let's define those. Our Champions curriculum, as Catharine mentioned, is an asynchronous learning path consisting of videos, articles, and exercises compiled into one place for people to go through at their own pace. Part of the curriculum includes assistive technology training, not only a high level of how to use different assistive technologies, but what are they, who uses them, and why. The applied practice exercises throughout help people to practice what they're learning. We made sure to incorporate different learning styles. Some people learn best by watching videos. Others learn best by doing activities. We needed a combination to really help this information stick with people. Going through the Champions training comes with responsibilities. Afterwards, we expect champions to be able to do the following. The first one is advocate. Champions should be able to advocate and help their team understand the accessibility needs that they have. We also need them to explain the importance of accessibility when that's necessary. Liaison, we wanted them to work with the central accessibility team as a liaison between us and their team. Learning, we expect champions to continue their learning with office hours and other internal training opportunities at GitHub, but also external training opportunities. Tooling, we expect champions to help team members on the central accessibility team come up with ideas for new accessibility tooling that will help all teams across GitHub make more accessible experiences. And finally, audit support. We expect champions to review, triage, and resolve accessibility issues within their product. That brings us to our third takeaway, which is pilot with a small group. We started with 17 engineering champions, and now we have 52 engineering, design, and content champions. We started with 5 bootcamp participants, and now 20 people have gone through the bootcamp. So you don't need to have a large group to gain insight into the benefits of your educational program. One of our engineering champions who went through the pilot said this: I loved that the training was super detailed to a point where someone with zero information on accessibility can get started with basic concepts, all the way to acknowledging problems that they didn't know existed. Hearing feedback like this was a great way for us to know our educational investments were really making a difference. Another thing that we saw was an increased confidence in using assistive technology by champions going through the program. This is one of the metrics that we are tracking. So we sent out a survey before and after, it's the same survey, gauging a person's confidence level using different assistive technologies, and here's what we found. 52% of participants felt more comfortable using voice control software, which is software that allows a user to speak commands. 47% of participants said they felt more confident using VoiceOver, which is a screen reader on Mac OS, and screen readers allow the screen to be read to the users. And 40% of participants said they felt more confident using screen magnification software, which is software that allows a user to zoom in to a user interface to make it larger. This was really awesome to see that our training was making an impact on individuals. Even more awesome to think about how this can have a ripple effect and impact the entire company. Some additional impacts of the pilot include an increased velocity of closing audit issues, decentralization of accessibility remediation across teams, and more applied accessibility engineering and design practices, which helps reduce net new accessibility issues. Speaking of design, when we were creating the Champions pilot, we had a meeting with design, specifically Alexis, about the content for the curriculum. In that meeting, we realized we had two separate programs that were seeking to solve a lot of the same problems. One of those being increase accessibility education and awareness. We wanted to figure out how can we work together, which is leading us to our next section on companion planting, which Alexis will be talking about.
Thanks, Lindsey. And it seems like that meeting just happened, but when I really think about it, it was last January. So it's been a little bit. And I think it was one of the most significant takeaways that we can offer y'all, which is to lean into organic partnerships regardless of teams and titles. Sometimes we just get too focused on our specialties or silo ourselves in work. Yet, if you have the same goal, why not work together? Who says that a designer can't contribute to an engineering accessibility bootcamp, or that engineers can't work with content champions to make new projects, or that we can't interview other stakeholders in the product development lifecycle to help us get more informed about what we should be offering in a product management bootcamp? With this epiphany, if you will, we decided to split the work between leads. For example, general lectures from A11y Design Bootcamp were recorded and shared as part of the Champions program. And once we started companion planting, we started to observe and hear some really interesting feedback.
As we went through our programs, we paid extra attention to both programs and what one wanted that the other had, and vice versa. For example, our bootcamp participants wanted more hands-on experiences. They wanted to do more practice to apply the learning. On the other hand, our Champion program onboarding had a series of async activities and exercises they can do at their own pace. Bootcamp participants had a personal experience by participating together with their colleagues in the course. They didn't just stop there after the bootcamp ended. How could they keep connecting and asking questions about accessibility, learning and trying new things with each other? When creating the Champion program, we were mindful that the onboarding experience went 100% async, so they needed time to come together, to engage and connect. So we started a monthly Champions Connect meeting, which we focus on a specific topic that champions are working on so that they can learn from each other. And we also hosted bike bashes with pairs of coaching and champions working together on a queue of issues. We will set up a Zoom room so that they can jump in and be together and go through the bike bash together, which creates a sense of community. So we saw the benefit of hands-on experiences and exercises and community engagement. Continuing with the theme of wants and haves, flipping with what champions wanted. They wanted more in-person training. So we are exploring more ways to bring them together for more facilitated trainings where they can ask questions live and get more discussion around topics that may be more technical or advanced. We know that we have the start of this with our current design bootcamp, so we're exploring how to extend this to engineers and product managers so that they too can get the same benefit of this engaged training. Our champions had high-level introduction to assistive technology through a video series that overviews the different types of assistive technologies, followed by exercises. We've created these trainings internally so they're highly relevant to GitHub. As we heard from Lindsey, while there is still an increased overall comfort in using assistive technology, They wanted to go deeper. In our bootcamp program, we offered more in-depth training by inviting some guest speakers, which would be our team members, to provide more detailed training and to answer more specific questions about assistive technology as it relates to that team's workflow and use cases. It's definitely encouraging to know that there's such strong interest in better understanding how to use assistive technology, and we can definitely engage, connect with them, and take them along. And we have a captive audience in our bootcamp, which encourages us to build and to consider how we might package this training for our champions program as well. As we discussed, what both programs wanted and what the other may have that the other didn't, we recognized that there were two commonalities between these two programs. First, they wanted more time together. They found connection in the shared experience of learning and working together towards accessibility. Second, they wanted more experience with user research and included users with disabilities. We started to assess how might we bring this to more of our hubbers so that they may better understand the needs of our customers. One thing I'm proud of this program is how quickly we responded to feedback. One example is taking the feedback for more engagement with our customers with disabilities. We created this request by creating a roundtable fireside chat. That was part of our design organization's first internal conference last summer. We had 5 customers with disabilities, and over the course of an hour, our team got to hear from them about their experience using GitHub. They learned about what works, what are the areas of friction, and how accessibility features, like different color modes, has a big impact on their experience. It was such an engaging conversation, and it was actually one of the most highly rated sessions of the conference, which signaled to us a strong interest in the connection to our customers with disabilities. So we wanted to keep doing this. We invited one of the participants back for a deep dive into one specific workflow, which lasted for about an hour. From this conversation, we were able to create a highlight reel to be used as pre-work for our bootcamp, which allowed our designers to establish a relationship with the customer to recognize why creating accessible designs is so important. This experience gave us momentum of how can I shift left even more, and how can I make sure that I'm thinking of these users when I design or develop experiences. On to Alexis.
Thanks, Catherine. And I still love the Looks Good to Me conference. Thank you for all your labor in organizing that. And as someone who leads Accessibility Design Bootcamp, it was so cool to see the direct impact it had on our cohort. A lot of people wanted more information. How could they get involved? What could they do to be bigger advocates within their feature teams to make sure that we had enough folks behind us to make these efforts happen? And it was at this time we realized just how many people wanted to contribute to our education system. At first, it was very much from the accessibility team, and now we were having a lot more help. We credit our momentum to our 5th takeaway, which is to collect, review, and take action on feedback. It's great to have qualitative and quantitative data, but if nothing's being done with it, you're leaving your garden unattended, which means fruits can spoil, pests and weeds can come in, or worse, it dies. For instance, we crowdsourced an idea from design champions to make a best practices video for how to make accessible animation and GIFs that was reviewed by champions and bootcamp cohorts. By working with past participants, we could not only keep up with our value of relevancy, but we were also showing to teams that were listening to what they wanted, and we wanted them to get involved in the feedback loop. While this is a content example, we were seeing this also extend to programs and our process. In terms of programs, we were seeing a lot of support and demand for these new things that we've been able to spin up in the past couple months and semesters. First, we have an internal customer research panel, and that's a way for us to get in touch with more folks with disabilities and be able to hear their experience using GitHub. Because of all of the push from designers and other product stakeholders, we also have really gone in deep on our inclusive user research efforts. And it's been a pleasure to work with our user research team on this as well. And lastly, and we've talked about this already, we're expanding training beyond engineering and design, which is really cool because we want folks who are working on feature teams to be able to understand the language of accessibility and be able to have the same goals when building products. In terms of our process, we're starting to see program participants be self-starting. One of my favorite ones is watching champions who have completed their training nominate and even talk to other folks to join the champions program. Champions are also becoming voices for accessible content and more accessible training. And lastly, and probably the best one for me, is that bootcamp participants are taking on part of co-creation. And this last one is key because talking about scale, one facilitator quickly becomes a limiting factor. By allowing others into and to contribute to the process, or even take on doing some modules and the training themselves, we develop layers of knowledge for accessibility throughout the design organization and give my vocal cords a bit of a break.
We covered some of these previously, but just to highlight other changes that we were inspired to make based on feedback. As Catharine mentioned, we have our bug bashes, which are organized events focusing on reducing accessibility debt. Advanced training, we're able to give champions even more training to help them independently triage audit issues at a higher scale. And then our Champions Connect meetings, which are those monthly meetings to help champions get a chance to meet with each other. Hopefully you can see how impactful feedback can be. And that leads us to our sixth takeaway, which is collect and reevaluate metrics. We want to collect metrics to determine the impact of our program, but we also want to reevaluate the metrics we're collecting to see if there are new things we can collect or changes we need to make on what we're already getting. It's a bit of a meta idea, but you get the point. Because we are collecting metrics, we are seeing champions reach higher heights, even higher than we had imagined. Audit issue closure has increased 9.5 times since the beginning of our program. We're also seeing them take additional learning opportunities, such as the advanced internal training that we provide at GitHub, but also external training, such as the IAAP certifications. Our first champion is actually going to take her exam on this Friday, which is super exciting. It's so inspiring to see how motivated people can be about accessibility when you give them somewhere to start. So let's start wrapping things up. Throughout the presentation, we gave you some takeaways, so I'm going to sum them up for you here. Number one was start where you are. Determine what you're working with and where your gaps are. Number two, go where you're wanted, where there is a clear advocacy for accessibility and willingness to invest. Number three, pilot with a small group. As I mentioned earlier, we started with only 17 engineering champions and 5 bootcamp participants. Now we have 52 engineering, design, and content champions and 20 design bootcamp participants, and those numbers are increasing dramatically. Number four, lean into organic partnerships regardless of team and titles. Without this, our education ecosystem would have been disjointed. Number five, collect, review, and take action on feedback. We saw how this impacted some big changes for both of the programs. And number six, collect and reevaluate metrics. Over time, you'll want to show your progress and impact.
We wanted to share a few pro tips with you. There's a lot to be cultivated through an open garden. When you keep your work secret, like a walled garden, it's harder to cross-pollinate. Then allow for others to log in and offer opportunities to connect, support, and partner with you. And in working in this secret garden, it tries hard for you to be able to see beyond the garden to the opportunities that exist on the horizon. When you break down these walls, you invite flexibility in how you work and take in the inputs and provide the outputs. This can be analogous to considering the different learning styles and cultures of a team. Some are more visual, others are auditory learners, and some may need to move around, and others may need more time to process before they can engage. Having recognition of these differences helps ensure inclusion and approachability of our content. Cultural differences exist in how they may respond and engage discussions, reading styles, and also be mindful of the different time zones, which is why we talked about earlier having 2 different boot camps for different time zones. It is also important to ensure that your training makes sense for your organization. The beauty in our trainings has been in the relevancy and customization to those unique teams. You'll be efficient with their time, eliminating any content or materials that are easily found online or in general introductory materials. We are sure to let them know that these materials do exist, but we want to specific on them. When we create the training content for them, they're more understanding and aware of how accessibility directly impacts them, their workflows, and their customers. For example, it is much more impactful to share a top 10 issues at GitHub versus a top 10 issues on the web from a generic blog post. Last but not least, teach people the rules, help them understand the what and the why for the rules, and help them understand when those rules can be flexed a little bit. It's about teaching them how to think critically about accessibility. When they're able to do this, to talk themselves through an accessibility consideration, then we are getting that much closer to the desired behavior change that comes through shifting left in our work.
We hope that the story of our garden, along with the pro tips and takeaways that we've just provided, inspire you to cultivate new or nurture existing A11y education programs in your organizations. Because the more we work together, the easier the work becomes, and the sweeter the garden's harvest is. Thanks for listening to our talk. Unfortunately, I have to run to a meeting, but Lindsey and Catherine will stay on for the live Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alexis, Catherine, and Lindsey. Attendees loved your content. As Alexis mentioned, they have to run to a meeting, but Catherine and Lindsey are still here, and we have a ton of questions. Please help to upvote your favorite questions, and we're going to get to as many as we can in the next 10 minutes. And I will grab the first one. Okay, what's been the most challenging part of boot camp or the Champions program?
I'm not going to take this one. The challenge is actually managing the demand, to be honest. You know, we have to be really strategic about which teams we onboard into the Design Champions Bootcamp. We are now at the point where people are asking us for, can we take the bootcamp? And that's a great place to be. And for the Champions program, we are actually at the point where we went from cohorts where we had a certain number of engineering champions come together on a quarterly basis to kind of go through the program together. But now it's open-ended and anybody can do the onboarding whenever they can, but the challenge with that is distribution of availability, that they can start whenever they want. So we have a little bit of communication within the team to recognize they don't need to wait to get started.
Right.
So we have a couple of levers going.
Gotcha. Thank you, Catherine. Okay, next question. Are the accessibility champions able to focus on accessibility work during their standard workload expectations, or are they monetarily rewarded for doing the additional work? If so, how difficult was it to get leadership buy-in for that additional compensation?
Yeah, I can take this one. So starting with the first part of it, are the accessibility champions able to focus on their work? So we have managers nominate champions before they can go through the program. And as part of that nomination process, they agree to the fact that champions may spend up to 20% of their work week on accessibility work. So it's more of a partnership. They realize that this is something that they're going to need to invest in. It's not just a training that they do once and then they're done. So that's part of the process of becoming a champion. And then in terms of monetary rewards, so they are not monetarily rewarded. We are talking about a reward system internally that would include a few different things, but we're still working on that. And I have seen several champions put in their promotion packets, if they're trying to go up for a promotion, that they are a champion. So I've seen this help for career growth as well. And just being able to learn more about accessibility while doing your other work for free, like getting 20% of your time to learn about accessibility has been a really important factor for people wanting to become champions.
Great. Thank you, Lindsey. Okay, are any of your trainings publicly available?
I'll take this one. Yeah, they're not.
Nothing beyond AxCon or anything that we've been doing publicly, but we don't currently have any public offerings.
Got it. Yeah, and the slides are from this presentation are on the session page. So there's a lot of great tips in there. Let's see. I'll grab another question. How did you define what are the competencies and knowledge that your champion needed?
Yeah, I can take this one. So as I mentioned, we had started with just engineering champions. And since I'm an engineer, that's kind of where my heart was at. But we wanted somebody to come in with zero accessibility knowledge. So they needed to know how to do basic engineering, like what is HTML, what is CSS, like that kind of stuff. But in terms of accessibility, we didn't expect them to have anything. So we tried to tailor content for a beginner, but also not super beginner to where somebody with accessibility knowledge would just be bored for the beginning of the training.
Gotcha. Thank you, Lindsey. Another question. How do you create a safe space to ask, air quote, stupid questions?
I can take this one. It's about creating an environment where everybody feels welcomed, first of all. Which is why we created these icebreaker questions in the beginning of the session. They were just fun icebreakers, not necessarily related to work. And it just created this opportunity for the team to connect and to come together and to feel like they're in an environment where they feel supported. So that's number one. And number two, we as an accessibility team are very mindful of our communication and how we answer questions to Slack and our discussion post to help them understand we're here for them. So we bring that perspective and attitude into these meetings so that they know that there really are no stupid questions. Everybody has to start somewhere. And so we haven't had anybody say, I'm sorry, these are a really dumb question. Nobody's done that. So I think that's a really good indicator of that psychological safety that we built. And Alexis, as a facilitator, always does a great job of saying, in relating those questions to actual touch points to make them feel validated in the questions.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Okay. How much work or hours do you think you put in to the planning and preparation? Did you curate a lot of existing content?
Yeah. So thankfully, as with any program, there's a lot of time investment upfront. But now we have created kind of a turnkey program where at day 1 and day 4 content is pretty evergreen. Day 1 is really like an introduction to accessibility, and day 2 and day 3 are the ones that require a little bit more time of creating a content specific to that team. So, and we will work with that team's lead to say, hey, tell me about the workflows that are working on. And so that we can identify some workshops that we can do. And so we really do a lot of like on the spot workshopping with them, and the investment returns. So after each session, we'll refine and come up with some notes for the next time. So we are able to carry that knowledge forward. And when we have a boot camp, Alexis, as a facilitator, would take 1 to 2 weeks prior to really prepare and make sure all the content is ready. And we've also developed a playbook, which is a markdown file with all of the pre-work and all of the content. In the beginning, we started with a lot of external facing content, but as we increased our own internal accessibility content, we were able to replace some of those external recordings with internal recordings. So those are the kind of things we're taking the efficiencies and showcasing our own work as we go along with the program. And I think the key is flexibility and being smart with reuse and repurposing of content.
Absolutely. Thank you, Catherine. I think we have time for 1, maybe 2 more questions. Okay, next one here. How are you feeding accessibility learning back into your system beyond just posting and sharing case studies and checklists, etc.? Is there any guidance you can offer about ensuring continued engagement and advancement?
I can start this one, and then I'm sure Catherine will add some more context to it. But one of the things which we mentioned during the presentation was bug bashes. So when there are a lot of accessibility audit issues for a specific issue that's the same, we'll all get together in a room and just knock it out wherever we can. I feel like that's going back into the system just in terms of fixing issues. We've also seen some champions just kind of take initiative and think about accessibility as they're maybe redesigning a feature. They're making sure to include us earlier. And since they are acting as the liaison between our team and their feature team, they have kind of direct contact to us, and they know like how we work and when to get us involved and what types of things we may ask for, what the audit process looks like. So it just helps to shift things left a little bit in the process. And Catherine, I'm sure you have more to add.
Yeah, one thing I can add is we're providing some pairing opportunities with our inclusive customer research programs and teams so that they're able to kind of watch and understand the accessibility experiences in those user research studies. And that's a way to kind of make those connections. And that's another thing that we've done, as we talked about with our inclusive customer research panel. We had about 5 customers, and that was another way that they were able to really kind of begin to gain some more awareness about the accessibility issues. And we also had them come back for another deep dive session. So I think the more opportunities we can have them engage with a customer or a user with a disability really helps to drive home that learning and that awareness. And we found that to be really impactful.
Great, thank you. And with that, I do think we are at time.